Hello, hello. Hi, Marcy. Hello, Hunter and Nellie and John and Nadia. Hello, hello.
Hi.
Hi, Jason. Hi, Matthew. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the Facilitator Cards April Playground. It's really exciting to have you all with us. And I'm Meg Bolger. And well, I guess I'll just jump right into my intros, just in case you don't know me. I know some of you know me really well, and some of you, this might be your first time seeing my face instead of just my email. So hello, I am Meg Bolger. I am the head of Facilitator Cards. I am coming to you from Tacoma, Washington today. I'm usually in Vermont, but I'm out here on the West Coast, so it's a little earlier in my day. And I would love to do a 1 second warm-up question with all of you. 1 second, it's going to take a little longer than that. A quick warm-up question with all of you. So if you could put in the chat, or if you want to reply out loud, you can do that as well. Okay, here's the question. I would love you to type into the chat, where are you calling in from? And then I would love to ask you, what does the sound of a vacuum bring to mind for you? So feel free to type that in the chat, or if you're more of a say it out loud person, feel free to give us a wave and say it out loud. Welcome, Kelsey. We are just getting started here. Ooh, childhood, father's workshop. See, that's so specific. Wood shop, love it. Marge's weapon in the Simpsons arcade game. Okay, I didn't know I was going to learn so much about people through this question, but I am here for it. A strange feeling of accomplishment. Okay, wonderful. Great. Okay. Great. Brings to mind my chore list. Yeah. We can put that aside for the next hour. You don't got to do it. Don't got to do it. Okay, great. So if you're, Kelsey, if you're like, what is happening in the chat right now? What's happening is people are sending in where they're at and also what the sound of a vacuum brings to mind. That's our warm-up question for the day. So feel free to add your thoughts in there if you would like to. Okay, so this may be your first playground. This may not be your first playground, but let me kind of give you an overview of how this session works. So today we're going to do 2 facilitation frameworks, or kind of activities, things that you can use to do a lot of different processes, and we're going to just do we're going to focus in and do some specific ones today. So we're going to use timeline map, and we're going to use make a model. And for those of you who don't know, these are facilitator cards. They are 2 of 60 cards in the deck. And facilitator cards are basic frameworks, processes that you can use to get reads on your group, to brainstorm ideas, to clarify and get into conversations, and to make decisions. Today, we're going to do 2. One is kind of like a brainstorming, how do we see this idea from a new perspective? And one is kind of helping us detail and see something with more specifics. So we're going to do the process as participants. You are all going to be in the participant seat, and then we'll do a little bit of debriefing, and then we'll talk about the process of facilitating it. What did you like about the activity? What are ways we could tweak or change it? So we'll get to, I know this joke is corny, but I love it. We'll get to sit with our participants and our facilitator hats. So we'll do both sides of those things. So we're going to jump in and get started, because this is a quick session. So we're going to jump right in, and we're going to start with this process called timeline map. So here's how it's going to work. We are going to spend the next 5 or so minutes, so all of you are going to spend the next 5 or so minutes making a timeline of your facilitation journey. Okay, so what is going to happen is I'm going to put you into solo breakout rooms, and you can either use the whiteboard feature that's built into Zoom. So when you get into your rooms, if you hit share screen, there will be a whiteboard feature, and you can select that, and you can use the drawing feature and the text box to make your mind map or your timeline map. Or if you roll old school and want to go pen and paper, you can spend a minute once you get into your breakout rooms to grab a piece of paper and a pen, and you're going to draw out a timeline map. And that map is going to involve your journey as a facilitator. And I want you to ideally get between 5 and 10 key moments in your journey, between kind of what really, where would you start it up through now. And if you want to go future focused, you can even go past now, those 5 to 10 key moments in your facilitation journey. So you can do that on a piece of paper and a pen, or you can use the built-in whiteboard in your individual breakout rooms. Okay, any questions about the direction so far? Okay, all right. So before you come back, I'll let you know when you have 2 minutes left. Before you come back, I'll just invite you to take a screenshot, or there is a way to also save the whiteboard in your breakout rooms. This is just going to be for your reference. We're not going to like collect all of these, though I would love to see them, but it's just going to be for your reflection and for your kind of like introspection into your facilitation journey. Okay, last call for questions. If you get stuck or need help, there will be a button in your breakout room for call for help. Otherwise, I'll let you know when we have 2 minutes left, and then we'll come all back and talk about the process. Okay, all right, I'm gonna open the rooms up and I'll see you all in a little bit. Yeah, Marcy, John, Nadia, did anyone go physical or just using the digital? Digital,
go. First time. It's
fun. Okay, yes, cool. Oh, digital with John, was that an iPad? Digital, but also kind of analog at the same time. All right.
Well, my intention was to put it up on the screen, but I don't know how to access the whiteboard. Is that what you were just talking about?
Yeah, the whiteboard in Zoom, there's like a way to do it. You find it in the screen share. It's like kind of hidden in the screen share feature.
Okay.
But we won't actually be screen sharing it with each other, so it's totally okay that you're the only one who can see it.
Okay.
All right, welcome back, everyone. So just an open-ended question or kind of a broad question to start us off. Did anyone learn anything unexpected by doing that process? Kelsey, I saw you nodding.
Yeah, I actually, Nadia, I'd love to hear what you were going to say too, but I hadn't really reflected that, wow, I guess I've been facilitating my whole life ever since I was a little kid.
Okay, so your like journey started before you kind of like consciously would have placed it before.
Yeah, I don't know if it's a chicken or the egg thing, but it's often like, oh, we're in a group project. Yeah, sure, I'd be happy to share it on behalf of the group. Or I'm in a, performing arts group, and it's like, yeah, give me the microphone. I'd like to, so it's like, I guess I had never really had consciously thought about gravitating toward facilitation, emceeing, both personally and professionally.
Cool. Can I ask a really specific question about the process? Did you put a dot like where you're like, this was my first facilitation thing, and then you were like, no, it came earlier? Or did you realize that as soon as you started writing, where your first thing was like childhood or group projects?
Yeah, I was thinking like childhood, and so what I have sort of images are like of my elementary school, and then of like playing music, and then being a newspaper reporter, and then getting into UX, and then design thinking. So it was sort of like a flashback and just sort of pulling together actual images to represent each of those.
Cool. Awesome. That's so interesting. Thank you for sharing, Kelsey. Nadia, what about you?
Well, I'm kind of scientific in my approaches usually. So of course I started with a date when I jumped into my first facilitation world, or the world of facilitation. But then I got thinking, well, how did I get there? Like what happened before that? So it was a reflection of sort of all the things I did beforehand. And yes, it was a sort of a a path to get me ready for facilitation because I'd done all these other things. So it's like Kelsey, I had a reflection of that. But then of course I went into like every 5 years, what did I do? And that was kind of fun to look at it that way. And what I found is that I started quite a long time ago. So that was the first reflection that I've been in this an awful long time, but how it's evolved. And despite the fact that I've been in it a long time, I am actually busier than ever. So, it just goes to show you, you can facilitate for a long time in life.
Cool. That's awesome. Thank you. That's such a cool way and such a different approach of like, you had a specific date. I think that's really interesting. Yeah. Any other reflections or things that kind of became apparent to you as you were writing out your timeline? Anyone else? Yeah, Jason, go ahead.
For me, I've realized I've ebbed and flowed when it comes to facilitation, because like my professional career started out teaching history, and I was very, very lecture heavy. But then when I went to teaching at the university level, I realized like, oh yeah, my course was a very small group facilitated discussion experience. Although I didn't realize it at the time, and I didn't really have the tools to facilitate effectively. And then like when I bounced to where I am now with Campfire, I did a lot of like sort of teaching heavy workshops, but now I've graduated or like gradually like pulled back towards like, well, let's do more facilitation. So I've just kind of like ebbed and flowed with my career choices.
Yeah, super interesting. Something that I like, so I did the activity too while you were all in your breakout rooms. And something that I realized that I genuinely had never thought of is how intertwined teaching facilitation has been. Like I started teaching people how to facilitate probably 1.5 to 2 years after I started facilitating. And that has been true my whole career, which is like wild. Like, so that was just something I had never thought of before. I was like, yeah, teaching facilitation has actually been a huge part of my facilitation like journey. And I'm sure that's like shaped it in so many ways, but I had never realized just how early that came in to the mix. So that was interesting. Okay, I'm gonna have us transition from the experience of getting into like, debriefing the activity. So like, I don't have my official facilitator hat, but like facilitator hat thinking, what reflections do you have about how I facilitated the activity? Like just like any reflections or any initial reflections on how I facilitated the activity or the experience of being a participant in it.
I wondered when you suggested that we take a screenshot and then said later on that they weren't going to be collected, but I wondered if they were going to be shared since you'd already said we were taking a screenshot.
Yeah.
And I have this screenshot and I'm still wondering what's the purpose of the screenshot.
Great. So I don't know if I would have ever thought of like, it's not going to be collected, but we might still be shared. I think that's a really interesting like level of like, okay, collection is one, but temporarily sharing would still be a like level of like vulnerability or exposure that people would have curiosity about. So I think that's really true. The purpose for me is just so that you can look at it while you're talking. Like if you're a lot of people, like I want to be able to reference it while I'm sharing about it. And that was really all the purpose was. For me, you could though have people get into breakout rooms. If you wanted this process to take longer, you could put people in breakout rooms and say, I want you to share your timeline maps and walk each other through it, and that would be a reason to have it. But yeah, that's a great question. And I thought a really interesting, like collection and share are actually separate kind of things. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. I saw Matthew and then Nadia and Kelsey.
Yeah, real quick point. I've actually never been in a session where the kind of solo time is sort of done with individuals in their own individual breakout room. And I kind of love that actually, because I find a lot of times just the chaos of being on a live Zoom call can feel like there's so many things going all at once, and that you can have a little bit more like psychological safety, if you want to call it that. It's sort of some quiet time by yourself. And yeah, that little tidbit I really enjoyed. Hadn't seen that done before.
Yeah, awesome. I see Marcy is agreeing with you in the chat. I like the first time I saw that done, I was like, why does this make such a big difference? But it does. Like it all of a sudden you stop being observed, and I think that like makes a huge shift. Yeah, Kelsey, what do you want to jump in with?
I'll echo that too. Like, I love that tip. We're going to do that now. Solo breakout for focus. I would just add maybe 3 things. One, I really appreciated like your energy as soon as we got into we came together and we started sharing where we were and about vacuum cleaners. So it's very seamless. I just appreciated the energy and the engagement there. 2, I love that you also participated in the activity and that you yourself did it. Like, even though this probably isn't your first rodeo, but I feel like there's something that we can always be learning and having that beginner's mindset. And then 3, it got me sort of wondering about, even beyond the tool within Zoom or paper and pen, I also wonder, like, maybe we could even open it up, like any tool that you have, whether it's Mural or Miro, right? Like, maybe, because I immediately just went into Mural and I was like, well, I know that I'm sort of maybe breaking the rules here, but maybe we could even encourage that, or say, hey, use whatever tools you may have at your fingertips.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yes, totally. And I love that you break the rules. I think that's totally fine. If somebody's more comfortable with a different tool, like, that's awesome. The reason I didn't recommend that is because I know some people would be like, oh yeah, I should do that. But like, they, would like, it would be more of like I want to do it there versus I feel really comfortable. So that's why I didn't invite it, but I love that you did it anyway. Yeah. Nadia, what were you going to say?
I was going to just say that, as you being the facilitator, I find your energy is so encouraging. I get into these activities knowing that you're there to help us if we need it. You give all the instructions. So to me, it was really well done. I did have one question. When would you use this timeline map? What's the best time to use that?
I'm going to throw it back out to the group. Does anybody have ideas on when they would use it with groups that they work with?
I've used this as an onboarding tool. So in organizations where you have a lot of new people, I divide people up into the time frame that they joined the organization, and I have them create a timeline storyline about, and I have a framework for them telling the story of that time period of the organization. So the new folks kind of come into the narrative of the organization, and so they already have a little bit of a grounding. And so it's really kind of fun, because sometimes I've done it digitally. I've done it on Miro and Mural, but I've also done it with just big chart paper and candy as the medium for creating your story. So licorice works really well, by the way. And so it's really just kind of an exercise of bringing people into the story of the organization.
Nice. Love that. Yeah, other times I've used it is if we're talking about, so I used to do a lot of social justice workshops, and something I would talk about is if I wanted people to realize kind of like how much they've learned, and therefore how to hold space for people who are still learning that process, I would be like, I want you to map out your social justice journey, right? And be like, this is where I started. These were some of the pivot points. These were the people who helped me along the way. You can give like all those different prompts. But I think it's a really great process anytime like a time horizon becomes like this significant data point. So, we used it as an individual process. What John's talking about is very much like using it to map out the timeline of a company, but asking people to take responsibility for certain pieces of it. But I think as soon as like past, present, and future becomes like an interesting part of the conversation or something you want to bring in, I think you can bring this activity into that. Yeah, go ahead, Hunter. Then we're going to transition to our second one.
Also interesting, so I do social justice facilitation. So also interesting in thinking about historical context for things, because it's so interesting in doing that kind of collection of what people are aware of in terms of social movements and different events, and trying to plot that along and thinking about just a larger perspective in that kind of way. Yeah.
Yeah, Totally. Yeah. So like you could also say like we're going to look back at the last 10 years and the events that have been shaping the political landscape of the US. Like it's a collective time lapse or of a time map, and you're just asking people to map out what are those different pieces, right? And that could be like a really interesting place to start the conversation, instead of being like, here's what has been, like it's group shaped, it's generative, but also gives you a place where you can be like, and we're going to zoom in on these 3 things. And they're like, oh, we came up with those, like there's this back and forth agency between like they're coming up with them and you're focusing in on them. So I think that'd be another really cool time to use it.
Mhm.
Okay, excellent. So that's timeline map. That is, this super powerful. We did it in 5 minutes. I think this can be, John's example, I imagine would take much longer than 5 minutes to create the map and then also to debrief it, right? So people often ask like, why don't facilitator cards have like times on them? And it's often to me because they really can expand and contract to fit the time you have and to kind of like for the scope of the work that you're doing, right? So we did ours in 5 minute making it, and we could have probably done a 5 minute debrief. Versus John's, I would want to have an hour, maybe 45 minutes to like really get into those different parts of the timeline and even making it, spending time with that process more. So that's just a little more knowledge there on the card. Okay, we're gonna do one more activity together. This is perhaps a little ambitious for the time frame, so we're gonna have to stay a little bit more like high level. I know we could do this conversation probably for 2 hours, but we're gonna do it in a half an hour. So that'll be a fun challenge for all of us. So we are going to do make a model. So green facilitator cards are all about like generating ideas or kind of brainstorming and seeing something in a new way and making sense of it. So we're going to do make a model, and we're going to do make a model. We're going to make a model, the 9 of us here, the 10 of us here, about how to create psychological safety in groups that we lead. I know there's a ton of research about this. I know there's a ton of wisdom, but we're just going to use the wisdom of us in the room. And we're going to think about like, if we were, teaching people how to facilitate who have never facilitated before and have no idea how to create a container where people can really like explore and participate, like how would you help them build that container of psychological safety or just of like, being able to explore together? So the first part of make a model is we need to decide what type of model we're going to make. So here's what we're going to do. Okay. So what you should see right now is 3 different types of models: pyramid, ladder, and cycle. So what I'm going to ask is, in a moment, I'm going to invite all of you to vote on which model you want us to make as a group. So we're either going to make a pyramid model, and this is going to be a model where it's like you need a lot of this, a little less of this, and just a little bit of this in order to create psychological safety. We're going to make a ladder model, and that's kind of like you need to do this stuff before you do this stuff before you do this stuff as you're climbing up the ladder. Or we're going to make a cycle model, and that's going to be like there's a couple of key things you need to do, and you need to keep doing them over and over again in order to reinforce that psychological safety. So here's what I would love you to do. At the top of your screen where it says facilitator cards is sharing their screen, there should be a button that says view options. And if you select that, there should be an annotation feature. So if you pull up your annotation feature, so again, that's under view options, where it says facilitator cards is sharing their screen, view options, annotation feature. If you select the stamp button, select a stamp, and I just want you to put a stamp somewhere on my screen. It can be anywhere you want, but I just want to know that you made a stamp. Okay, we've got 3. Yes. Okay, anyone struggling to make a stamp? All right, we're all good? Okay, great. So here's how it's going to work. I'm going to clear our stamps. and I want you to put a stamp in the circle of the model you want to flesh out. So do you want to make a pyramid model, a ladder model, or a cycle model together about psychological safety? I think all of these could work, but which one do you want to explore? Wow, okay, that was a very clear answer, everyone. Okay, we got 5 for cycle and 2 for the other ones. Okay, so maybe a different day we'll do the other ones, but we are going to do a cycle model. Okay, so this is how it's going to work. Ultimately, we're going to try to make a 5-part cycle, or maybe more, maybe less, but we're going to try to make a cycle model together of how to build psychological safety with our groups as a facilitator. So what I would love you to do is I would love you to take the next 1 minute, to pull out a piece of paper or open up a blank Word document, something you can write on. And I just want you to journal for 1 minute about what do you think are the like foundational essentials for creating psychological safety as a facilitator. I'm gonna give you 1 minute. Don't need to cover everything because we've got the wisdom of the group, but just take the next minute, write that down, and then we'll start brainstorming about this, making this model together. Okay, that was 1 minute. If you're like, I just started thinking, like at the end of the minute, I just started thinking, that's all good. Okay. Does anybody have one idea that they're like, I think this is an essential or just kind of like foundational part of the cycle? It doesn't necessarily, to me, a cycle is something that you can sometimes feel like it has a starting point, but it can also all work in like this kind of, in a cyclical way. So it doesn't have to be the first thing, but yeah, go for it, Nadia.
Read everyone personally.
Ooh, say more about that.
If you really can. I mean, obviously on a very, very big Zoom, it would be difficult, but make it as personal as you can so that every person feels important in that meeting.
Okay, make it personal when you're talking to them. Okay, great. Yeah, Marcy, go for it.
Build trust.
Okay, how would you, is there something specifically that you would encourage people to do?
Be true to your word. Whatever you say you're going to do, you do it.
Okay.
And if you assure people that something's going to happen, follow through on that.
Awesome. Can you give me an example if somebody was like, I don't know what you're talking about, like when you've seen people maybe not do that you think has been really destructive to the trust, or a positive example?
Well, you started out by saying we were going to make a model, and if you started talking about something completely different having nothing to do with models, I would say, wait a minute, I thought you were going to say we were talking about a model.
Yeah.
That would decrease my trust in your ability to take us to the next step.
Got it. Yep.
Instead of building trust.
Got it. Yeah. And what I also love about what you just said there is like, it's not just like that would throw me off, but it's like, well, now I just like don't believe you, right? Like exactly. I just don't. Exactly. Yeah, which is really interesting. I think
without follow through, there's no reason why I should trust you're going to tell me the truth next time either. So.
Yep. well, just to reassure you, I'm typing this over on our model, but I wanted to brainstorm first before we kind of put it into a cycle.
Great trust in you.
Great.
Right.
All right. What else? What else, folks? Yeah, John, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say start with low stakes, something low stakes. Like the vacuum one was a great way to enter into the conversation and learn just a tad bit about what people are thinking. And it was, for me, it was non-threatening.
Yeah. Low stakes questions, low stakes activities, but just that idea of like, I'm not going to start off by asking you to be vulnerable, you know, or like if somebody's like, oh, it makes me think of my childhood, like maybe that is a little vulnerable, but it's also like super contained, right? Yeah. Low stakes, super important for sure. Yeah, Hunter, go ahead.
I think a lot about the agency of participants, and so thinking about the options of participation, as well as tools to help kind of almost co-facilitate the space, maybe not co-facilitate, but help to co-create the space, right? Of like tools like oops and ouch, those kinds of things. So sorry, I put that under the umbrella of like agency.
Yeah. Give options. So give options for how to participate, and also like maybe like explicit, I almost think that might be a different one too, like explicit invitations of like kind of new norms. Yeah, go ahead, Matthew. We'll see if we can hear from everyone, and then we can loop back around. Yeah, go ahead, Matthew.
I'd say any opportunity or anytime someone shares something, having the chance to sort of give some type of recognition or feedback. So acknowledging and sort of making them feel seen and heard.
Acknowledging participants. Man, acknowledging is a long word. Seen and heard. That's way shorter. Seen and heard. Love that. Okay. Kelsey, I know it's harder to share later because then you end up with you're like, everyone's said a lot of things, but yeah, do you have another place that you might go?
Actually, I love how you modeled it for us when saying, let's hear from everyone first before we have sort of repeat participation. So I wonder, how might we create a space of inclusion? So for all different types of folks, even if you're introverted, extroverted, you know, by voice or in the chat, and making sure that everybody gets a chance so we don't just have a few voices dominating. Yeah.
Do you see that as, would you like, I would roll that up into the like give options for participating. It's kind of like another iteration of how to do that is the like explicit, like out loud in the chat. Yeah,
that's true. So maybe maybe here's something. How might we model vulnerability, mistakes, there's no failing if we're always learning together.
Okay, beautiful. Okay, I am going to put these up into kind of a cycle, and then we'll see like if there's something we see in a new way because we're looking at them as like this cyclical process. I don't know if I can draw arrows fast enough, but we'll just put them up and I'll ask you to put the arrows between them in your mind until I get them there. Okay. Doop, doop, doop. Okay, so here's what we came up with. Do the things you say you're going to do. Give options for participating. Model what we want to see. Make people feel seen and heard. Seen and heard. Ask low stakes questions. Make it as personal as you can. Does anyone see like either an order, a flow to these? Because I put them in a random order, but curious if you see a flow.
Yeah, I think Nadia's point about greeting people, it's funny that you should say that. I was just having that conversation with a group of people that I'm working with about setting the conditions, setting the space up correctly, and greeting everybody as they come in and asking questions was what everybody's going to try.
Okay, so maybe model what you want to see, give options for participation, see and ooh, I don't know. I'm starting to see a little, keep talking folks if you have ideas as I'm moving things around.
I have one other one that I think I would put in here.
Okay.
And that would be letting them know beforehand what you will be asking of them. In other words, is this a big share session, or is this, like mostly working in groups, or are you going to be doing a lot of things on your own? Kind of just letting people know what they're entering into.
Yeah. I almost see that as like like before you get into the thing, do this.
Yeah.
And then when you're in the mod, like when you're in the mode, you want to continuously cycle around. Like, well, I don't know if low stakes questions feels like something that feels like a, in a cycle model, low stakes questions feels like a really interesting one, because it's something I think it's really important to do at the beginning, but maybe not important to do throughout. But I don't know, what do people think? Do you think that's one you should keep coming back to? Or is it more of a like, it would make sense in like a flow chart, but not necessarily in a cycle?
Yeah.
Anyone have any reactions to that?
I think it depends on the space. And if you're changing subjects, if you're changing groups, if you're grouping new people together to kind of set the tone and that culture within those like subgroups, I think you can make an argument.
You can make an argument for it. Yeah, that's a great point.
I appreciate that you were trying to sequence them, but I actually see them as an ongoing cycle without a beginning and end, that they're all happening simultaneously at the time that they're called for. And regarding the questions, I might have say, instead of only lows, if we're going to keep questions in there, it would be about graduated questions depending on the stage we're at. Because sometimes you build psychological safety by challenging people too, if it's appropriate at the time to challenge them. So in any case, more my point is that it seems to me that this is a cycle that has no beginning and no end. They're all happening at the appropriate time simultaneously to build psychological safety.
I just put a parentheses around questions because I think something else that comes to mind with low stakes is just the idea that like sometimes you want to create, like, have people reflect on their own before going to the large group, and it can be a really high stakes question, but because they're doing it as in like a lower stakes environment, you can, you know what I mean? There's kind of like ways to play with the stakes throughout, even as you escalate the like personalness of the question or the vulnerableness of the question. Something too, Marcy, that like I didn't give us the option to do this, but something that could be true is we could see this as like a cycle. We could be really satisfied with this as a cycle. And if we had picked like the pyramid, we could say like all of these need to happen, but some of them need to happen more, and some of them need to happen like, it's okay if you just have a sprinkling of making it really personal. It's important to do, but you don't have to do it a lot, versus like it's really important to make people feel seen and heard, and you have to do that like significantly more. So that's also, I think, how the model kind of changes what we end up with. Any other reflections, just looking at the model?
I think that there's a I'm Kelsey. I'm when you were talking about give options to participants, I think that was yours, wasn't it? I'm not sure. Anyway, I was thinking about this idea of how much control people feel like they have, right? So I'm entering into a discussion with a small group or a big group. How much control do I have over my answer or what I'm going to say? So a low stakes question might be, well, that's pretty easy, but a more in-depth, more personal or more complex question, I'm going to need some time to think about that. I have control to prepare myself with that. So give options to participants, I think, is about like, there's levels of control that I think you want to provide participants so they can kind of chart their own path and their kind of entry and exit into whatever the activity is.
Cool. Okay, I'm gonna unscreen share in a moment. So if there's, I'll send this to you all. So if you want to like look at it or have it to reference, you're welcome to. But I'm just gonna turn off the screen share for the moment. So I have like a processy question now to kind of like transition us from making it to talking about it, which is, do you think that making this kind of exploring the question of psychological safety in this like model framework versus just like what makes psychological safety and having it as a discussion, how do you think that changed what we came up with, how you were thinking? Did it, might not have.
Sorry.
Go ahead, Marcy. Yeah.
It concretized the topic, you know, that's a broad topic, psychological safety, really broad. And you helped bring it down to something that made me visualize it and helped me therefore narrow it to fit the visual.
Awesome. We'll go Nadia, Hunter, and then Kelsey.
Okay, well, I was going to say pretty much the same thing. Just seeing, you know, that there were only a couple baubles that we had to fill, it didn't mean that we had to really go crazy with all our ideas.
Yeah, that's similar to what I was thinking, right? It doesn't have to be exhaustive, and also it doesn't have to be like perfect or right, even trying to make that model right now. It wasn't about making the perfect model, it was about the process. And so I really appreciated, right, that piece. And so
Yeah, I
thinking
love
about
that, Hunt.
just
Yeah,
different-
progress over perfection, right? And we're sort of building this together, and we were even demonstrating psychological safety through the process itself, right, collectively. I also found it really helpful, your description of, all right, a pyramid means that there's a lot of this and then a little less, a little less. A ladder means that this is the steps that you take, 1, 2, 3, 4, it's more sequential. And then a cycle is sort of a ongoing thing that you keep going through the loop there. Even thinking through the different frameworks in that way and the different models that way, it became, you know, that sort of opens up, makes it clearer then to visualize. And you're right, there's some things that are more like a pyramid, there's some things that are more like a ladder versus a cycle. That even in itself I thought was really, really helpful and interesting.
Go ahead, Marcia.
I also appreciated that you said to us right from the start, it didn't have to be an exhaustive list because we were going to group create this. Because I could have gone, you know, that helped limit my energy, you know, my mental energy.
Follow-up question. If I had been like, we're going to create a cycle for psychological safety versus we're going to create a model, let me explain just the really basic structures of these 3 models and have you vote on which one you wanted to do. How did that, like, did that influence anything? Did you like that choice? How did that work for folks? Like is maybe not the most, but just like, how do you think that shaped or made a difference? Yeah, Jason.
Yeah, so I voted on one that didn't get picked, right? And so I was already thinking like, okay, like I'm thinking like modeling this to like hierarchy of needs, pyramid structure, things like that. But then it's like, oh, the cycle. And so it completely like twisted up not twisted like in a bad way, but like I had to think about it from an entirely different angle and approach as to what like would be important to maintain, to create and maintain that safety. So yeah, just totally altered my thinking about the topic.
Interesting. Yeah. Go ahead, Marcy.
I'm personally not a fan of the open-ended. You know, I've been in facilitations where I've either been asked to, or I've actually told people to physically demonstrate this as a group. You know, they had to sort of like create some physical model of a concept with 4 or 5 people physically in a group. And it's so, to me, that's very amorphous. It's not tangible enough for me. So the reason when you said model and you gave us, when you use the word model, I immediately went in my mind, what does she mean? Which kind of model? And then you gave us some, and then I knew what kind of, you know, that we were talking about parts and various kinds of parts that we're going to build something as a whole.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, go ahead, John.
Yeah, Marcy, I thought we were going to do interpretive dance, but I'm glad that didn't happen. No, what I thought was interesting about Jason, what you just said is I started thinking about, oh, that ladder would be a good way to unpack the questioning, the levels of questioning. And so I was thinking about, okay, here's another model I could use. So I began to think about the visual that would spin off of this cycle. And so I appreciated the fact we got to choose, and I was wondering, how is she going to do this? How is she going to go? I was wondering in my facilitator head, now what would I have done with that? I would have been a little scared because I, don't like the open-ended, unexpected. I like a little more control.
Yeah. Well, just to like share a little bit more, like I could have said, we can use any model, let's suggest models and then let's vote, right? Like that would have been really open-ended versus like we have 3 models. I had a mural ready for all 3 of them. Like I had a ladder, I had a pyramid, I had a cycle, and then I was able to just be like, boop, we're doing that one, right? So I had a flow chart in there earlier and I was like, no, this is going to get way too complicated. Like, even if that's the best one, it's too complicated and it feels too amorphous. So, or intimidating technology wise to do. So I just didn't like, you know, so that's where like, I think some of the, like, I give you some control, but I also retain some control comes in. Yeah. Go ahead, Hunter. And I'll also just open it up for like any other reflections, you know, about the process. If somebody was like, man, this thing you're talking about, like making a model, like when would you use it or how would you tweak it? Or like, you know, when do you see it being really helpful for a brainstorm? I'd love thoughts on that too. Go ahead, Hunter.
So I don't have anything for that last question, but just a slight point about the process of choosing a model and having that agency was the anonymity of voting also. Like I think there's something around that in terms, again, of psychological safety. They're not held, right? Or you feel funny, right? Like, oh no, Jason didn't get right what he voted for. Like, what does that mean? Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, totally.
Yeah. Yes, and that, Hunter, the anonymity. I've often thought about that in different situations where you see the votes coming in, and then you always have the option of maybe waiting to reveal the votes, and then how does that sort of influence sort of groupthink or people are influenced, right? Both positively and negatively, right? I'm not passing judgment one way or another, but I'm often curious about that, and sort of the power of that too.
Totally. And if it was really important for it to be anonymous, I probably would have used a tool like Mural where I know no one's going to see it. And in this case, like it didn't really matter too much if you all influenced each other. I was like, cool, great. You know, I don't know if you did because you were all pretty simultaneous, but it didn't matter as much. So that anonymity didn't have to be guaranteed. But yeah, I think that's something to play with and be intentional with too. Matthew, any reflections about the activity itself? When you would use it, whether, you know, you think it's substantially different or like just a way to do generating ideas, just any reflections you want to share?
Yeah, I guess like my a reflection I guess I'd have is like, I've been reading thinking in systems, and so like all of it was like being put through that lens, like it's super fresh in my head. And I was just thinking like, man, these are like, much of them are like events that then sort of contribute to kind of like different loops around it. So like I was having a tough time just narrowing it into this cycle format, and that's like more just on my side of things. But yeah, I think it's really helpful whenever you need to sort of like bring a bit more coherence to such an open-ended question. And it also, I think it allows you to like build off of other people's ideas a little bit easier, because it's like you have the scaffolding of a model, which you then can start to like plug in different ideas into.
Nadia, I saw you had a thought. I have a follow-up question that you may or may not be able to respond to. The like before asking people to share, having people write for like 1 minute. Any thoughts on that?
Did you want me to answer?
If you have a thought, I would love you to answer.
Yeah, yes. Well, I do have a thought on that. I think it's excellent. Because it gets your thoughts sort of together. What I like about this is that I've done a lot of brainstorming, and brainstorming can be, I don't know, can be very hard sometimes because you get a lot of ideas, but then bringing it together and, you know, putting it in categories and all this. I find this is very neat and efficient, very neat and efficient. You get sort of people thinking sort of in a little cycle and little baubles. I don't know. I like that. I like it. There's a little bit more structure, even though brainstorming is supposed to be, you know, any idea goes. Sometimes that goes too far. That goes too far. And if you don't have much time, I can see using this definitely. You know, if you've got half an hour, as you just had, I think it's a very efficient method. And I like the pre-planning yourself. You know, what ideas do you have already, and then bringing it to the group. And we're 9 people, right? And I work a lot with 10 people at a time, so this would be very, very useful.
Yeah. I think it's interesting, like some of what we did today, like was just limited by the time factor. And so I was like, you know, we have to work in this kind of limited ways, and I want to keep us limited. But you're right. Sometimes I think like there are brainstorms where you really need an anything goes approach. Like you need to do that. And I think there are times where it's like, if we go really big, we're going to spend all of our time coming back to the essentials, right? And that is just going to get irritating because we're going to have to discard 95% of what we came up with. And people might feel like, well, why did we come up with the 95% if we're not going to use it, right? So I didn't think of that when I was planning this, but just because I said, we're just going to talk about the essentials, we're just going to talk about like some of those foundations, I think that gave us permission to be limited. And then because the cycle only has so many steps and it would become very messy if we gave, you know, 10, 15 bits to the cycle, I think that limited us some more. And so that's something that I'm kind of taking away from this experience too.
Yeah, very good.
Okay, we have 2 minutes left. If anyone has, so we have 2 minutes left. And I'll just do a little bit of just like making sure you know what's coming. So I will send you, I'll send you both of these, like I'll send you kind of what my notes were for the session today, what they look like. And I'll send you the mural in case you're curious. I can also send you the other models that we didn't explore if you wanted to know like what did your pyramid mural look like. It's very simple, but just in there if you're curious about it. And we do a playground most months. At Facilitator Cards, we've been doing them every month, and I think as long as people keep signing up, we'll keep doing them. To me, they're just really fun ways to like kind of see the cards in action, to get to know, like for those of you who don't have Facilitator Cards, like, you know, there are 13 other green ones and 13 other yellow ones that we could have done today, but we've just focused in on these, and now you've seen these in action, which I think is the best way to learn anything as a facilitator, is to get to be both a participant and then kind of unpack them as a facilitator. So I hope you enjoyed getting to be in both seats. I really enjoyed working with all of you. It was such a like wonderfully sized group for what we did today. If you want to really briefly, I would love you to share one thing you're walking away with from this facilitation in the chat, just like one insight that you gained in the last hour. And then right at the hour, we'll all sign off together. So I'll give you 30 seconds to write that, and then we'll do my favorite way to sign off. Ooh, timeline map is a warm up. Okay, I have new questions. Okay, love that. So if you want to stick around, if you have any extra questions for me, you want to catch me right afterward, feel free to stay on. I'm happy to chat for a few more minutes. Otherwise, I'm going to have us all sign off. What I love to do is ask everyone to unmute. We're going to say 3, 2, 1. We'll all wave bye. 3, 2, 1. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
If you're still watching the recording,
have our
hello.